Close your eyes and imagine the taste of smoke. Not the comforting warmth of a hearth on a cold evening, but something darker. Something that claws at your throat and settles heavy in your lungs. Something that carries within it the unmistakable sweetness of burning flesh. This is Trier in the year 1587, a city nestled in the heart of the Holy Roman Empire. Walk these cobblestone streets and ask anyone what hell tastes like, and they will tell you without hesitation, this is what hell tastes like. Before we go further, you need to forget everything you think you know about witch trials. Forget the fairy tales and the cackling crones with pointed hats. Forget the Hollywood narratives where heroes swoop in to save the innocent at the last moment. This is not that story. This is the story of a machine, and one that does not run on steam or coal, but on something far more abundant in desperate times: human blood. It is lubricated by fear, powered by hysteria, and fueled by something even more dangerous than superstition: the bottomless, insatiable greed of powerful men. Standing at the window of his mansion, looking down at the gray square below, is one of the master engineers of that very machine. His name is Dietrich Flade. Look at him carefully. He is an aging man of perhaps 60 years, draped in a heavy fur-lined robe that costs more than most peasants will earn in a lifetime. The firelight catches the silver threads in his beard and the deep lines carved into his face by decades of deliberation and judgment. Flade is not some bloodthirsty monster. That would make this story too simple, too comfortable. No, Dietrich Flade is the opposite. He is the very picture of intellect and order. He serves as rector of the University of Trier. He is the supreme judge of the secular court. He is a trusted advisor to the archbishop himself. In his own mind, Flade sees himself as the scale, as the embodiment of balance, of reason, of law. He believes truly that the legal system, however brutal it may seem to our modern eyes, is the last barrier standing between civilization and total chaos. He is wrong. He does not see the shadow creeping up behind him, the shadow of the very monster he has spent years feeding, drop by drop, signature by signature. To understand what is about to happen to Dietrich Flade, you first need to understand what is happening to the world outside his window. Look at that sky. It presses down on the Gothic rooftops like a slab of lead. This is what historians would later call the Little Ice Age, a period of catastrophic climate change that turned Europe's breadbasket into a frozen wasteland. The famous vineyards along the Moselle River, which once produced wine that nobles across the continent would kill for, now yield grapes that are sour and shriveled. The frost comes too early, too hard. Crops rot in the fields before they can be harvested. The price of a single loaf of bread climbs higher every week, every day. Hunger does not simply cramp your stomach. It does not just make you tired or weak. Hunger reaches into your skull and rewires your brain. It makes you desperate. It makes you suspicious. It makes you capable of things you never thought possible. The peasant standing in his ruined field looks up at that gray sky and sees no God. He sees only black clouds and endless storms. And when his belly is empty, his mind demands an answer. It demands someone to blame. Why did the hail destroy my wheat but spare my neighbors? Why was my calf born dead? Why are my children crying from hunger while the baker's wife grows fat? Then a word begins to spread. It slithers through the taverns and marketplaces like a snake through tall grass. Maleficium, dark magic, witchcraft. Someone is doing this to us. Dietrich Flade turns away from the window and walks back to his desk. The firelight plays across stacks of parchment, each one representing a human life. He dips his quill into the inkwell, and the scratching sound echoes through the silent room. He is reviewing the list for the upcoming trials. The names slide beneath his tired eyes. An old woman who lives alone at the edge of the forest. A traveling herbalist who sells remedies for toothaches. A widow whose husband died under suspicious circumstances. Another widow, and another. Always widows. Oh, always the ones with no one to protect them. To Flade, this is merely administrative work. He feels no hatred for these women. But here's the terrible truth. He feels no pity either. He is a man of cold calculation. He believes that social order must be maintained at any cost, and if burning a few suspected witches can calm the raging mob outside, if it can prevent a riot that would topple the government itself, then isn't that an acceptable trade? A necessary sacrifice, he tells himself, for the greater good. He does not allow himself to think about what necessary sacrifice actually means when you are the one tied to the stake. A knock at the door breaks his concentration. His butler enters carrying a silver tray. On it sits a goblet of mulled wine and a few slices of smoked meat, luxuries that men outside would slit throats to taste. The butler's voice trembles slightly as he delivers his message. News from the bishop's palace. Team suffragan bishop Peter Binsfeld wishes to remind Judge Flade about the Schmidt family case. He says that the interrogation process is moving too slowly. The quill freezes in Flade's hand. A single drop of black ink falls onto the white parchment, spreading like a blood stain. Peter Binsfeld. Even the name sends a cold finger running down Flade's spine. You need to understand who Peter Binsfeld is. If Dietrich Flade represents the cold, rational arm of secular law, then Binsfeld is something else entirely. He is the avatar of holy fire. He is a true believer, and there is nothing more dangerous in this world than a true believer with power. Binsfeld has written books about witchcraft. He has developed methods of interrogation. He has trained the torturers. And he has one absolute conviction that guides everything he does. There is no such thing as an innocent person. There are only those who have not yet confessed. Flade sets down his quill, his voice hardening as he responds. Tell the bishop that he adheres to due process. Torture has limits. It is meant to extract truth, not merely screams of meaningless agony. The butler bows and retreats, but the look in his eyes, that nervous, pitying look, stays with Flade long after the door closes. Something is changing in Trier. Flade can feel it in the air, like the static before a thunderstorm. The trials began by targeting the lowest rungs of society, the beggars, the outcasts, the ones nobody would miss. But lately, the net has been cast wider. Craftsmen, merchants, and just last month, a minor city official was dragged into the dungeons. What is driving this escalation? Flade walks to the fireplace and watches the flames consume the dry logs. He remembers last week's council meeting. The treasury of Prince Elector Johann von Schöneberg is completely empty. War inflation, and the electors' extravagant spending habits have hollowed out the church's coffers. And then there is the law, the very law that Flade helped write. The assets of those convicted of witchcraft are to be confiscated. A portion pays for the trial costs. The rest goes to the authorities. A terrible thought crystallizes in Flade's mind. This machine does not just consume people, it consumes money. And the more it eats, the hungrier it gets. The next day, Judge Flade descends into the dungeons to oversee an interrogation personally. He wants to show Binsfeld that he is not negligent, but he will conduct things his way, by the book, with precision and legality. The dungeon lies deep beneath the city, where sunlight has never reached. The air is thick with the stench of mold, rat droppings, and something else, something metallic. The copper tang of dried blood. Groans echo from the dark corridors, like the voices of the damned. Flade enters the main torture chamber. In the center of the room, a woman hangs suspended by the strappado. Her arms are tied behind her back, hoisted high, twisting her shoulder joints to the point of dislocation. Her face is a mask of agony. She is the wife of a baker, a woman Flade recognizes. He has bought bread from her husband's shop. Her crimes, according to the accusation, casting a spell to spoil a rival baker's dough and summoning a storm that tore the roof off a church. The executioner asks if she confesses. The woman sobs that she is innocent. Lord have mercy. She is innocent. The executioner looks at Flade, waiting for the order. According to Binsfeld's manual, this is the moment to intensify. Add weights to her feet. Apply the thumb screws. Pour boiling water. But Flade looks into the woman's eyes. He sees terror, raw and absolute. But he does not see the devil. He does not see deception. He sees a woman he knows. A hard-working woman whose only crime was being accused by someone with a grudge. Flade commands them to stop. The room falls silent. Let her down, he orders. The testimony is inconsistent. She is delirious with pain. He cannot sentence anyone based on these ravings. The scribe, a thin man with a face like a ferret, looks up from his parchment. His eyes narrow. "But your honor," he says, his voice oily and insinuating. Bishop Binsfeld's manual clearly states that silence or denial is itself proof that the devil is aiding the witch to endure. If you show leniency, Flade's voice thunders through the chamber. Am I the judge here? Or is that book the judge? The woman is lowered, sobbing with relief. But as Flade turns to leave, he feels their eyes on his back.
They know about the shipments, my lord.
The executioner,
the magistrate
the
has the ledgers. He's bringing charges tonight.
Shadows. These are not the respectful gazes he has known for 30 years. These are the calculating eyes of wolves who have caught the scent of wounded prey.
It's all lies!
That night,
can't believe this
Flade returns
hearsay.
to his mansion. A letter waits on his desk. There is no seal from the bishop's palace, no sender's name, just a single line scrawled in haste. He who shows too much mercy to the weeds damages the wheat. And sometimes the gardener can be mistaken for a weed if he stands too close to them. Flade's hand trembles. This is not advice. This is a threat. He looks around his opulent room. The Persian rugs, the gleaming silver, the chests filled with gold accumulated over a lifetime. For 30 years, these possessions have been symbols of his success, his security, his untouchable status. Now, for the first time, he sees them differently. He sees them as bait. The church bells begin to toll in the distance, but tonight they do not sound like a call to prayer. They sound like a hammer driving nails into a coffin. And Dietrich Flade, the judge, the scale, the master of law and order, realizes with horrible clarity that he has just become the most valuable prey in Trier. The machine he built is turning, and it is hungry. The winter of 1588 did not simply arrive in Trier. It descended like a funeral shroud, wrapping the city in a cold that went far deeper than frozen rivers and snow-covered streets. This was a cold that seeped into bones and settled into hearts. Birds froze solid on branches and fell to the ground like stones. The river slowed to a crawl, its edges crusted with ice that crept further toward the center each night. People burned their furniture to stay warm. They burned their books. Some, it was whispered in the darkest corners of taverns, burned things they would never speak of aloud. But inside the city walls, there was another kind of cold taking hold, a silence that had nothing to do with snow. Dietrich Flade sat in his study, staring at the fireplace where he had burned that threatening letter months ago. The paper was long gone, reduced to ash and carried up the chimney, but the words remained, branded into the soft tissue of his brain. The gardener can be mistaken for a weed. He had tried to return to normalcy, tried to be the judge once more, impartial and powerful and untouchable. He put on his robes each morning. He reviewed his cases. He signed his documents with the same confident flourish he had used for 30 years. But Trier had changed around him. Or perhaps it was more accurate to say that Trier had finally revealed its true face. It started with small things, the kind of shifts that could be dismissed as coincidence if you were desperate enough to believe it. A shopkeeper who usually greeted him with elaborate bows suddenly discovered urgent business in the back room whenever Flade's carriage approached. A colleague who had shared wine with him for 20 years crossed to the other side of the street when he saw Flade coming. The beggars, those wretched souls who had always reached for his coins with trembling hands, now pulled back into doorways when his shadow fell across them, as if his very presence carried disease. This is isolation, the first weapon of the tyrant, and it is devastatingly effective. Before they destroy your body, they must destroy your world. They must cut every thread that connects you to other human beings until you stand completely alone, an island in a sea of hostile silence. Flade told himself it was coincidence. He told himself people were simply preoccupied with their own suffering, distracted by hunger and cold. He told himself many things in those dark months. But deep down, in that part of the mind that knows things before the conscious brain is ready to accept them, he understood. The word had gone out. Dietrich Flade is tainted. The New Year's reception at the Electoral Palace should have been his moment of reassurance. This was the event of the season, the gathering where the power brokers of the Holy Roman Empire came together to drink and scheme and remind each other of their importance. Bishops in their purple robes, counts dripping with gold chains, merchants whose wealth could buy small kingdoms. For decades, Flade had been the center of gravity at these events. Men lined up to shake his hand, to seek his legal advice, to bask in the reflected glow of his authority. Tonight When Flade walked through the massive oak doors of the great hall, the room tilted. Conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned toward him, then quickly turned away. A circle of empty space formed around him, an invisible quarantine zone that moved with him as he walked deeper into the hall. He approached a group of city councilors, men he had known for 20 years, men whose children had played with his children in summer gardens. Councillor Klein, Flade said, forcing warmth into his voice that he did not feel. He extended his hand. "How is your vineyard recovering from the frost?" Councillor Klein looked at Flade's outstretched hand as if it were covered in open sores. He did not take it. "God's will," Klein muttered, and turned his back. One by one, the others followed. They studied the tapestries on the walls with sudden fascination. They examined their wine goblets as if the secrets of the universe were hidden in the burgundy depths. They looked anywhere at all, except into the eyes of Dietrich Flade. Then across the crowded room, Flade saw him. Peter Binsfeld stood by the great hearth, a goblet of wine in his pale hand. He was not participating in the social theater around him. He was simply watching. His eyes followed Flade with the detached curiosity of a naturalist, observing an insect pinned to a board. He did not smile. He did not frown. He simply watched. And in that moment, Flade understood with terrible clarity that this was not spontaneous. This was not the natural drift of social fortune. This was orchestrated. Every turned back, every avoided gaze, every whispered conversation that died at his approach, all of it had been arranged. The word had come down from the pulpit itself. Flade left the reception early. As he descended the grand staircase, the buzz of conversation erupted behind him. Louder now, almost frantic. He could feel them discussing him, dissecting him, dividing up his reputation like vultures tearing at a carcass. The cold air outside hit his face like a slap. He was alone. But while Dietrich Flade was being strangled socially in the world above, something far more sinister was happening in the darkness below. The dungeons of Trier never slept. The machine required constant feeding, and the raw material was human confession. Day and night, the torturers worked their craft, extracting the words that the prosecutors needed. You must understand how this system functioned. It was elegant in its horror. A victim would be brought to the rack or the strappado. The pain would begin, slowly at first, then building to crescendos that shattered the mind's ability to resist. And then the questions would come. Who did you see at the witches' Sabbath? Give us names. Who is the leader of your coven? If the victim screamed out the name of a peasant, the torturer would shake his head. No, not a peasant. Someone bigger, someone powerful. Think harder. Pain. Let me tell you something about extreme pain. It unlocks doors in the mind that should remain forever closed. It rewires the brain's relationship with truth. If you twist a person's arms from their sockets long enough, they will say anything to make it stop. They will name their own mother. They will name the Pope himself. They will name whatever name the torturer whispers in their ear during those brief moments of respite, between waves of agony. In the spring of 1588, a pattern began to emerge in the dungeon transcripts. A young boy, accused of killing cattle with dark magic, confessed under torture that at the midnight gathering on the mountain, he had seen a man arriving in a golden carriage. a man wearing the robes of a judge, a midwife, her fingers crushed in the thumb screws, confessed that the devil gave his orders through a human lieutenant, a man of high standing, a man whose name began with Dietrich. Report after report landed on the desk of the governor. The name Flade appeared again and again, a dark thread woven through dozens of confessions from people who had never met each other, who could not possibly have coordinated their stories, unless, of course, they had all been fed the same name by the same torturers. Flade learned of these accusations through the few allies he had left, servants who still felt loyalty, minor officials who owed him debts they had not yet repaid. He sat in his library surrounded by his beloved books on Roman law and classical logic, and he fought back the only way he knew how. "This is hearsay," he shouted to the empty room, his voice cracking with desperation. "The testimony of a condemned criminal is inadmissible under the Constitutio Criminalis Carolina. It cannot be used against a man of rank." He flipped through the pages frantically, searching for precedents, for loopholes, for the legal weapons he had wielded his entire life. But the books offered no comfort. The law he loved was built for a world of reason. He was fighting a war against spirits and demons, and against the supernatural. Logic is not a shield. It is an insult. Desperation drove Flade to do something he had never imagined. He went to confront Peter Binsfeld directly. They met in a small garden behind the Jesuit college. It was early spring, and the first green shoots were struggling against the lingering frost, a cruel illusion of hope. "You're coaching them," Flade accused, abandoning all pretense of diplomacy. His face was pale, his eyes rimmed with the red of sleepless nights. "Your torturers are feeding my name to the victims. They are manufacturing evidence." Binsfeld walked slowly along the stone path, his hands clasped behind his back. He stopped to examine a withered rose bush, touching one dead petal with almost tender curiosity. He was fighting a war against spirits and demons, and against the supernatural. Logic is not a shield. It is an insult. Desperation drove Flade to do something he had never imagined. He went to confront Peter Binsfeld directly. They met in a small garden behind the Jesuit college. It was early spring, and the first green shoots were struggling against the lingering frost, a cruel illusion of hope. "You're coaching them," Flade accused, abandoning all pretense of diplomacy. His face was pale, his eyes rimmed with the red of sleepless nights. "Your torturers are feeding my name to the victims. They are manufacturing evidence." Binsfeld walked slowly along the stone path, his hands clasped behind his back. He stopped to examine a withered rose bush, touching one dead petal with almost tender curiosity. "We do not feed names, Dr. Flade," he said calmly. "We merely extract the truth that Satan tries to hide. If so many souls, independent of one another, name you as their dark master, surely one must ask why." "Because they know you want my head," Flade shouted, stepping closer. His voice trembled with a mixture of rage and terror. "You want my lands. You want the confiscation fees to fill the Archbishop's empty treasury. This is not theology, Binsfeld. This is robbery, with a cross painted on top." For the first time, something flickered behind Binsfeld's calm facade, a flash of cold steel. "Be careful, Dietrich." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. His voice dropped barely above a whisper. "You speak of the church. You speak of God's anointed servants." He stepped closer, invading Flade's space, close enough that Flade could smell the incense that clung to his robes like a second skin. "Look at this city," Binsfeld continued. "The people are starving. They are terrified. They believe the devil walks among them, wearing the faces of their neighbors. They need a victory. They need to see that evil can be cut down, no matter how high it has climbed." His eyes locked onto Flade's. The taller the tree, the more wood it provides for the fire. "And you, Dietrich, you are a very tall tree. Your burning will keep this city warm for a very long time." Flade fled home, his mind racing through possibilities. He had relatives in Cologne. If he could reach the Rhine, get on a boat before dawn, perhaps escape this nightmare before it consumed him entirely, pack everything, he shouted to his servants, only gold and documents. Leave the furniture, leave the silver, leave it all. He was stuffing papers into a leather satchel when he heard it. The sound of pikes striking cobblestones, the rhythmic march of boots, not the chaotic shuffle of a mob, but the disciplined tread of the city guard. He ran to the window. Torchlight flickered in the gathering dusk. Soldiers were taking positions around his mansion, not attacking, not storming the doors, simply sealing every exit with the quiet efficiency of men following orders. He ran to the back entrance, locked from outside. He ran to the stables, empty. The grooms had vanished. Dietrich Flade, one of the most powerful men in the electorate of Trier, was now a prisoner in his own palace. For weeks he existed in a state of suspended execution. No official warrant was served. No formal charges were filed. But the siege was absolute. He watched his fortune evaporate before his eyes. Creditors who had once begged for his favor now circled like sharks, demanding immediate payment. His tenants stopped sending rent. His so-called friends filed lawsuits for imaginary debts, hoping to grab whatever scraps they could before the church claimed everything. Flade sat in his grand dining room, eating stale bread from silver plates, drinking the last of his wine from crystal goblets. The irony was suffocating. He was still, technically, the richest man in Trier, and he was utterly destitute. The end came on July 4th, 1589. The summer heat had finally broken through, thick and heavy. The air felt electric, charged with the tension of an approaching storm. The knock on his door was not polite. It was a battering ram. Wood exploded inward. Armed guards poured through the shattered entrance, led by a face Flade knew well, the mayor of Trier, a man Flade had helped get elected. Flade stood at the top of the grand staircase. He had dressed in his finest judicial robes, his heavy gold chain of office around his neck. If they want to destroy me, he thought, let them see exactly what they are destroying. Dietrich Flade, the mayor announced, his voice trembling slightly as he read from a scroll. By order of the Prince Elector and the Ecclesiastical Court, you are under arrest for the crime of crimen acceptum witchcraft, heresy, and treason against God. I demand a trial by my peers. Flade's voice echoed through the marble hall. I am a doctor of laws. I am entitled to... You have no peers, Warlock, a soldier sneered. They rushed up the stairs. They did not escort him. They seized him. One guard grabbed the gold chain around his neck and yanked. The link snapped, scattering across the floor like falling coins. They dragged him down the stairs, his velvet robes tearing on their rough boots. Outside, a crowd had gathered. Hundreds of faces twisted with hunger and rage. The same people he had judged. The same people he had tried to save from chaos. "Burn him," they screamed. "Sorcerer. Baby killer." A rotten cabbage struck his face, then a stone. Blood trickled into his eyes. They threw him into a dung cart, not a carriage but a wagon used for hauling waste through the streets. The humiliation was calculated, precise. They were stripping him of his humanity before they touched his body. As the cart rumbled toward the prison, Flade looked up at the cathedral spires cutting into the gray sky. He thought of Binsfeld's garden. He thought of the withered rosebush. The gardener can be mistaken for a weed. The iron gates of the prison opened like the jaws of some great beast and swallowed him whole. In that moment, Dr. Dietrich Flade, the judge, the rector, the scale of justice, ceased to exist. In his place was only prisoner number 14. And somewhere in the darkness below, the instruments of confession were being prepared. They had been freshly oiled. They were waiting. The dungeons of Trier existed outside of time. There was no sunrise here, no sunset, no church bells marking the hours. There was only the eternal dripping of water down stone walls, the skittering of rats in the darkness, and the rhythmic creak of the rack, a sound that once heard could never be forgotten. Dietrich Flade lay on a pile of damp straw in a cell that measured 6 feet by 8. The judicial robes were gone, replaced by a rough linen shift stained with things he tried not to think about. His hands, those elegant hands that had signed hundreds of documents, that had held the quill of absolute authority, were now swollen and purple, nearly useless. He was no longer a judge. He was a variable in an equation he himself had helped write, and the equation demanded balance. The iron door groaned open. Torchlight stabbed into the darkness. Time again, prisoner 14. 2 guards hauled him upright. He did not resist. His legs, crushed by the device they called the Spanish boot, could barely support his weight. They dragged him down the corridor, his feet scraping uselessly against the wet stone. The examination chamber was blazing with torchlight, a cruel contrast to his dark cell. And there, in the center of the room, stood the strappado, the same device he had ordered used on hundreds of others. He knew its mechanics intimately. He knew exactly how many pounds of pressure it took to separate the ball of the humerus from the shoulder socket. He had written reports on optimal techniques. Now he would experience his own expertise firsthand. Seated behind a high table was not Peter Binsfeld, but a civil commissioner, a mediocre bureaucrat Flade had once reprimanded for incompetence. The man now held the quill. He now held the power. Dietrich Flade, the commissioner droned, barely looking up. "Your denials grow tiresome. The devil is the father of lies, and by lying you prove his paternity over your soul." Flade's voice came out as a broken rasp. "I am a servant of the law. There is no evidence, no witnesses except those you have tortured into. The evidence is all around us." The commissioner slammed his palm on the table. "Look at the vineyards. Look at the frost that killed the harvest. Who else has the intellect to command the weather? Who else has the wealth to bribe demons? Flade looked at the instruments arranged on the table, the thumb screws, the heated irons, the pincers, and in that moment, a terrible clarity descended upon him. They did not want truth. They wanted a story. They needed the Grand Warlock to explain why God was punishing Trier. If Flade was the villain, then the church and state were heroes saving the people. If Flade was innocent, then everyone involved in this machine was simply a murderer. The story had already been written. They just needed him to sign it. "Hoist him," the commissioner ordered. The winch creaked, the rope tightened, and Dietrich Flade's world collapsed into a single point of white-hot agony. There is a romantic notion that brave men die for truth. In the stories we tell ourselves, martyrs sing hymns while flames consume them. They deliver stirring speeches about justice and righteousness. They go to their graves with their principles intact. But here is what the stories do not tell you. Pain is not a test of character. Pain is an absolute. It overrides dignity, memory, love, everything that makes you human. It rewires your brain until only one word remains, echoing through the hollow chambers of your skull. Stop. After the third hoisting, as Flade dangled in the air, drifting in and out of consciousness, something inside him shattered. Not his bones. Those had already given way. Something deeper. Something that had taken 60 years to build. He looked down at the scribe waiting with his quill, ready to record whatever words fell from the prisoner's broken lips. And Dietrich Flade made his decision. "Put me down," he choked. "I will sign." They lowered him to the floor. He collapsed onto the cold stone, weeping, not from sorrow, but from the animal relief of pain subsiding. "Tell us," the commissioner leaned forward eagerly. "Did you attend the Sabbath?"
My appeals are exhausted.
"Yes," Flade
I accept my
whispered.
fate,
And so
however
it
unjust
began.
It may seem.
He wove a story from the fragments of cases he had once judged. He became the author of his own destruction, building a narrative from confessions he had extracted from others. Where did you meet the devil? At the witch field near the river. Who else attended? Demons. They were black and hairy. They gave me gold that turned to coal in the morning light. And the crops, the snails that devoured the vines. I summoned them. Flade sobbed. I buried a pot of poison beneath the vineyard. To starve the people. To bring suffering upon the land. The scribe's quill flew across the parchment, scratching out words that would justify everything. The arrest, the torture, the confiscation of every coin Flade had ever earned. It was absurd. Dietrich Flade, the wealthy landowner, confessing to destroying crops that made him rich. It made no logical sense. But logic had left this room long ago. And the archbishop? Did you plot against his life? Yes. I made a wax figure and pierced it with needles. To bring him sickness. Excellent. Very good. Flade signed the confession with a hand that could barely hold the quill. In that moment, the scale of justice did not simply tip. It shattered completely. The man who had built his entire life on law and reason had just used a lie to escape torture, and in doing so had validated the very system that was consuming him. The execution was scheduled for September 18th, 1589. The morning dawned crisp and golden, one of those perfect autumn days that seem to mock human suffering. The sky was impossibly blue, the air sweet with the smell of fallen leaves. They brought Flade out of the dungeon into the light. He had not seen the sun in months. It blinded him, brought tears streaming down his hollow cheeks. He was unrecognizable. The confident judge who had presided over hundreds of trials was gone. In his place stood a shuffling skeleton, hair turned completely white, wrapped in a plain gray tunic. They loaded him onto a cart, not the dung wagon this time, but an open cart so the crowds could see their monster.
Soon,
The streets
they say
were
the carts are
packed.
coming.
People climbed onto rooftops, hung from windows, crushed against the lines of soldiers. They had come from villages miles away, entire families making the journey to witness the death of the Grand Warlock. But as the cart rolled through the streets, something unexpected happened. A strange hush fell over parts of the crowd. They had come to see a monster, but what they saw was something else. They saw an old man. They saw someone who looked like their grandfather, broken, trembling, human. Flade raised his head and looked at the faces around him. He recognized the baker whose wife he had tried to save from the strappado. He saw students he had taught at the university. He saw fear in their eyes. Not fear of him, but a different kind of terror altogether. The terror of understanding. If he could fall, no one is safe. The cart arrived at the execution ground beyond the city walls. The stake stood waiting, surrounded by bundles of dry wood and straw. It had been built tall so everyone could see. A young Jesuit priest approached, holding out a crucifix. "Do you repent, my son?" Flade looked at the wooden cross. He looked at the blue sky above. "I repent," he said. But he was not repenting for witchcraft. He was repenting for silence. For every death warrant he had signed before his own name appeared on the list. For every time he had told himself that the burning of an innocent woman was a necessary sacrifice for social order. He was repenting for building the machine that was now devouring him. Because of his confession and his high rank, the court had granted him one final mercy. He would not burn alive. The executioner, a massive man who smelled of sweat and ash, stepped behind him as guards tied him to the stake. "Forgive me, Your Honor," the executioner whispered. It was the only honest thing anyone had said to Flade in months. "Do your duty," Flade replied. The iron collar was placed around his neck. The garrote, a simple device of twisted metal, began to tighten. The world turned gray, then black. Dietrich Flade died not by fire, but by the slow crushing of his windpipe, silenced before the flames could make him scream. Then the torches were thrown. The fire roared to life, consuming what had been a man. The crowd cheered, but the sound was thin somehow, lacking the frenzy of previous executions. The smoke rose in a thick black column, joining the clouds over the Moselle Valley, and then nothing changed. The winter of 1589 came, and it was just as brutal. The frost killed the crops again. The bread prices climbed again. The hunger remained. A whisper began to spread through the taverns and marketplaces. The same channels that had once carried accusations of witchcraft now carried something far more dangerous: doubt. We killed the judge, and nothing improved. Maybe he wasn't the cause at all. Cornelius Luce, a scholar who had watched the execution from the crowd, returned to his study that night. His hands trembling with rage and grief, he dipped his quill into ink and wrote words that would echo through centuries. Wretched alchemy, by which human blood is transmuted into gold and silver. He wrote a treatise attacking Binsfeld's methods, exposing the machinery of manufactured confession. He was arrested, of course, forced to recant publicly. But the idea had escaped into the world. The seed of skepticism, watered by Flade's blood, had begun to crack the foundation of the witch hunt machine. By 1593, the trials in Trier sputtered and died. The money ran out. The people were exhausted. The machine ground to a halt, leaving behind nothing but a scarred landscape and the ghosts of the innocent. Walk through Trier today. You will find beautiful churches, cobblestone streets, cafes where tourists sip wine from the famous Moselle vineyards. But you will not find statues of Peter Binsfeld. You will not find monuments to the executioners or the commissioners who grew fat on confiscated gold. History, it turns out, is the final judge. Its verdict is slow, sometimes taking centuries to arrive, but it is absolute. The story of the Trier witch trials is not a story about magic or demons or supernatural evil. It is a story about us. It is a mirror held up to the darkest corners of the human soul. It shows us how fragile civilization truly is, how quickly law can bend to fear, how easily your neighbor becomes your enemy when the belly is empty and the night is dark. We look back at Flade in his era, and we tell ourselves we are different. We tell ourselves we have evolved beyond such barbarism. We would never burn innocent people based on forced confessions and manufactured evidence. But every generation builds its own machines. We just change the fuel. We find new scapegoats for our storms. The smoke cleared over Trier in the autumn of 1589, but the question it left behind still echoes through the centuries, unanswered and unanswerable. When the world goes mad, when fear becomes law, and greed wears the mask of righteousness, who judges the judges? And when the judges themselves are dragged to the stake, who will be left to hold the scales? Dietrich Flade's greatest tragedy was not that he became a victim of the machine he helped build. His greatest tragedy was that he understood too late what so many of us still fail to grasp. Justice without compassion is merely organized cruelty. Law without mercy is just tyranny wearing robes. And when we sacrifice the innocent for the greater good, we do not preserve civilization. We become the very chaos we claim to fight. The church bells of Trier still ring today. But if you listen carefully, late at night when the tourists have gone and the streets are empty, you might hear something beneath their chiming. The sound of a hammer driving nails into a coffin that never stays closed. Because the machine is never truly destroyed. It only sleeps, waiting for the next winter, the next hunger, the next moment when frightened people demand simple answers to complex suffering. And when that moment comes, as it always does, the question remains, will we remember Dietrich Flade? Will we remember that the highest judge in the land could not save himself from injustice? Will we remember that wealth and power are no shield against the mob, when the mob is sanctioned by authority? Or will we, like those who came before us, convince ourselves that this time is different, that our causes are righteous, that our enemies truly are monsters who deserve whatever fate we design for them? The verdict of history is clear, but the verdict of the future remains unwritten, and that perhaps is the most haunting question of all.